Chronicles of Ardenthal. Episode 3. The Gap. On the first day without a messenger, hardly anyone noticed. The writing room was prepared as it always was. Parchment lay in neat stacks upon the tables, the inkwell had been freshly filled, and the quills were cut. Alina sat at her place, sorting the replies from the previous day. The scribes worked quietly. The rustling of paper and the soft scratching of quills created a familiar sound, one that gave the room a kind of steadiness. It was almost comforting. Only around midday did someone notice that the corridor had remained silent. No heavy step, no clearing of a throat, no dust brought in from the road. The table for incoming letters stayed empty. "Perhaps tomorrow," one of the ladies said softly. Alina only nodded. She knew that marching took time. The roads east were not even, and rain could turn even firm ground into mud. 3 days were nothing. 3 days were not yet a story. But when no messenger came on the second day either, the air in the room changed. People came anyway. They came with questions they did not quite ask as questions. A mother wanted to know whether one could assume the men were well, as long as nothing else had been written. An old man wanted to know how long it usually took for word to arrive from a camp. A young woman asked whether a messenger would write, even when there was nothing particular to report. Alina answered calmly. She explained that a missing letter did not have to be a bad sign. She spoke of long roads, of marching orders, of rain, of camps where there was little time to write. She said all of it because it was true, and because it was necessary. In the afternoon, she went down into the town. The merchants had set up their stalls, but the voices were subdued. 2 men stood by the well and argued about distances, as if numbers could create certainty. If they covered as much ground in 5 days as the traders do in spring, they should be there by now, said one. Traders do not march with baggage and weapons, the other replied. When they noticed Alina, they lowered their voices. But she had heard enough. She stopped at the baker's stall. The man behind the oven had flour on his brow and did not wipe it away with the back of his hand. "Princess," he said. "How are you?" she asked. He shrugged. "People are buying less. They are saving. For winter? For everything." He looked at her openly as he said it, not accusingly, but without the usual distance of deference. In his eyes lay a question he did not ask. Alina held his gaze. "We still have stores," she said, "and the grain stands well." He nodded. "It does." But that was not the answer that calmed him. That evening, the council was summoned in the castle. The great hall seemed wider than usual because seats remained empty. Arvid's chair at the head of the table stood unoccupied. Serafina took his place without filling it. The master of stores presented numbers. The rations remained within measure, but if the march lengthened, they would need to calculate again. The steward spoke of the labor missing in the fields. They were making progress, but more slowly. "More slowly does not mean badly," Alina said. A councilman raised his eyes. "When autumn comes, slowly is very much badly." "Autumn is not here yet," she replied calmly. An older man with a grey beard placed his hands on the table. "We bound ourselves," he said, perhaps too quickly. The word hung in the room. Bound. Serafina did not answer at once. "We survived," she said at last. "That was the price. And now we continue to pay." Alina felt the room shift. Criticism was not an open attack, but it was there. Serafina looked at the man. "Your son went with them?" He nodded. "My husband as well," she said. It was not an emotional gesture. It was a reminder that no one here was untouched. On the third day, a single courier arrived. He carried no bundle, only one letter bearing the royal seal. His clothes were worn, his eyes reddened by the dust of the road. He handed over the parchment with few words. Alina opened it in the presence of the council. The report was brief and factual. A first skirmish had taken place. No decisive blow, no breakthrough. An advance had been repelled. They were wounded. The march would continue. Supplies were strained but stable. The king was unharmed. No names. Alina read every word aloud. When she finished, the hall was silent. "So they live," someone said. "As far as we know, yes," Serafina answered. The courier was already back on the road. There were no further letters. When Alina returned to the writing room, people were already waiting in the corridor. The news had spread faster than the messenger could ride. "Is it bad?" a woman asked. "There was a skirmish," Alina said. "Our men are marching on." That was the whole truth. Little was written that afternoon. Instead, people sat on the benches and asked to hear the official report again. They listened to every word, as if more could be found between the lines. One man asked why no names had been given. "Because it is a report to the court," Alina said, "not a list." He nodded slowly, but his brow remained tense. That evening, she went into the town again. This time, the conversations were more open. If there are already skirmishes before they reach the front, what will it be like once they do? Someone asked. "The king is with them," another voice said. "That will count for something, or cost him." The words struck harder because they were no longer whispered. Alina stopped. "Ardenthal stands," she said calmly, "and it will stand." The voices ebbed, but they did not disappear. That night she slept little. Her thoughts moved in circles. She thought of Mathis and the way he had written, of Henrik from the southern fields who had not wanted to be afraid, of the old man in the council whose doubt had grown, of the empty table in the writing room. On the fourth day, the writing room again received no post. This time, it was no longer quiet. One mother came and asked directly whether losses were being hidden. Another wanted to know whether officers held back letters to prevent unrest. Alina answered calmly, but she felt her words growing thinner. Not false, only less able to carry weight. She went down to the kitchen where several women stood close together. They spoke of the skirmish, though they knew nothing about it. "My brother said the people in the east fight differently," one said. "Your brother has never been east, but he heard traders." Rumors grew where facts were missing. Serafina stepped beside Alina. "They are looking for something to hold on to," she said softly, "and we give them only paper." Paper lasts longer than rumor. On the fifth day, a bundle finally came again. Not large, but visible. The messenger was younger than the others, his face narrow with exhaustion. He delivered the post with few words. Alina sorted the letters with a steady hand. Dorfhain, southern fields, western woods, riverbank. She noticed immediately who was missing. Henrik of the southern fields was not among them. She said nothing. She distributed the letters. She read aloud. She saw relief in faces she now knew by heart. Men lived. Sons lived. Brothers lived. But gaps remained. That evening, she sat alone in the writing room. The light had grown soft. Opened envelopes lay on the table. Scattered grains of sand, drops of dried ink. The days without news had changed something. Not loudly, not visibly, but it could be felt. Trust was not a solid thing. It was a net made of letters, of voices, of names that returned again and again. And when a name was missing, an opening appeared. Alina placed her hand on the empty space on the table. Tomorrow, more letters would come. Perhaps one from Henrik. Perhaps not. War did not consist only of battles. It consisted of the distance between two messages, and of the courage to endure that distance without filling it with fear. She extinguished the candle and left the writing room in darkness. Outside, Ardenthal lay quiet. The grain stood green in the fields. The Arden River flowed as if nothing had happened. Yet beneath that surface, something had shifted, and it would not move back into its old place. On the 6th day, patience was no longer something to be assumed. The writing room was fuller than it had been in the days before, though no one expected a letter. People came earlier, stayed longer, sat on the benches along the wall, and waited for something that had not been announced. It was no longer only about writing or reading. It was about being close to the place where news arrived. Alina worked as she always did, but she noticed that her presence now meant more than her words. They did not ask her only about letters. They looked at her as if she might see something others could not. A mother stepped up to her table. Alina recognized her. It was Henrik's mother. "Is it possible," the woman began carefully, "for a letter to be lost?" "Yes," Alina said calmly. "It is possible." "And is it possible for it to arrive later?" "That too is possible." The woman nodded. Her hands lay flat upon the table. "He did not want to be afraid," she said. "He had that written." Alina remembered. She saw the young man before her again, trying to seem stronger than he was. "He wanted to comfort you," Alina said. The mother smiled faintly. "That was never his strength." A brief silence grew between them. It was not a dramatic silence. It was the silence of two people who knew that hope was not proof. "I will come again tomorrow," the woman said at last. "I will be here," Alina answered. After she had gone, Alina remained seated a moment longer than necessary. She did not force herself to be calm. She forced herself only into order. In the afternoon, a trader from the south reached the town. He had taken detours to avoid military roads. His wagon was half loaded, his clothing dusty. Within an hour, the market knew more about the East than the court had learned in 3 days. They said there had been larger battles. They said the Allied troops had been pushed farther back than expected. They said the East was not a field, but a swamp of marching and death. When Alina heard of it, she did not go out at once. She waited until the voices grew louder. Then she stepped into the market. The trader stood at the center of a small crowd. He did not speak loudly, but with urgency. When he noticed the princess, he did not fall silent. He only lowered his voice. "What did you see?" Alina asked. "Smoke," he answered, "and many wounded on the road back." "Did you recognize men from Ardenthal?" He shook his head. "I did not ask where they came from." The crowd waited for her reaction. "Reports are not certainty," she said calmly. "Our men march with the king. That means structure and supply." A man stepped forward from the crowd. "And if the king falls?" The question wasn't meant disrespectfully. It was raw. Alina looked at him. "If my father falls, we will hear of it, and then we will act." No one contradicted her, but the faces remained tense. That evening, Serafina called the council together again. This time, the mood was less controlled. "The rumors are growing louder," said one councilman. "We are losing control of the narrative." "We never had control of rumors," Serafina replied. "Only of our response. If there are losses, we must be prepared." "We are," Alina said. All eyes turned to her. "How?" asked the master of stores. "With structure," she answered. "With assignments, with supplies, with work." She did not speak of comfort. She spoke of function. The old man with the grey beard studied her for a long time. "You are young," he said. "Yes," she answered. "And you believe order is enough?" No, Alina said calmly, but it prevents panic. No one contradicted her. That night, she barely slept. She walked through the castle without a torch because she knew the ways. In the northern wing, she stopped. The chambers were empty. The straw mattresses rolled up. A cup still stood on one table. Absence had become visible. On the 7th day, post came again. This time, a larger bundle. The writing room filled quickly. People did not push, but they stood closer than usual. Alina opened the letters one by one, sorted them, placed them ready. Name after name found its place. Henrik was not among them. Alina noticed before she wanted to admit it. She searched a second time, then a third. She checked the backs of the envelopes. Nothing. When the mother entered later, she already knew. "Is there anything?" she asked. Alina held her gaze. "Not today." The woman nodded. She had clearly expected nothing more. "Then tomorrow." "Perhaps tomorrow," Alina said. After she had gone, Alina remained standing at the table. She felt no dramatic blow. She felt a shift. A line slowly being drawn. That evening, she read the officer's official report aloud again in the courtyard. She did it deliberately beneath the open sky, not in the hall. The people needed to hear that there were words that endured. When she finished, it was quiet. Not empty. Quiet. A boy stepped forward. "My mother says one gets used to waiting." Alina looked at him. "One does not get used to it," she said. "One only learns to carry it." He nodded slowly. As the crowd dispersed, Serafina remained beside her. "You are becoming harder," she said. "No," Alina replied. "I am becoming clearer." Serafina looked at her for a long time. "That is not the same thing." Alina was silent. Later, in the writing room, the empty space between the incoming letters still remained. She knew it could be coincidence, a matter of logistics, a delayed messenger. But she also knew that war measured nothing fairly. Sometimes no letter came because no one was left to write it. She extinguished the candles and stood in the darkness for a moment. The silence was no longer only absence. It was warning. And Ardenthal began to understand that green in the fields did not mean everything grew. Some things disappeared, slowly and irrevocably. The wagon came in the early morning. They heard it first at the gate, a slow rolling over stone that did not match the rhythm of a merchant's cart. The wheels sounded heavier, more muted. Alina stood in the courtyard when the gate was opened. It was no great convoy, a single wagon. 2 horses, 1 rider alongside. Men lay on the bed of the wagon, not neatly arranged, but side by side. Blankets over their legs, bandages around shoulders, brows and hands. The first man to dismount was not a soldier of Ardenthal. He wore the colors of the Alliance. His gaze was alert, but tired. "Wounded," he said shortly. "Fit for transport. The heavier cases remain in the field infirmary." Serafina stepped beside Alina. The Queen asked no questions before the crowd. She only nodded and gave orders. The men were carried into the northern wing, into rooms that had stood empty only weeks before. Alina followed. She recognized 2 faces. One was from the western woods. The other had trembled on the day of the lists without showing it. Now he trembled visibly, not from cold. One man's arm had been bound too tightly. Blood had seeped through. Another lay with his eyes closed, murmuring in fever. "It was no great battle," said the officer who had come with them. "An advance, misjudged. We pushed them back. But it cost us." He spoke factually. It did not sound cold, only tired. "And the king?" Serafina asked. "Unharmed." The word fell heavier than it sounded. The officer handed over a sealed document. "Attachment," he said. Alina took it. Her hands were steady. In the writing room, she broke the seal. The first page was the official report. Movements, losses, strategic position. The second was a list. Fallen, wounded. She read the names quietly to herself. Jakob of Dorfheim, Rudolf of the Western Woods, Henrik of the Southern Fields. There were 2 more names she knew without ever having truly looked at them before. 5 fallen. She placed the sheet upon the table. The air in the room felt denser. Not because anyone wept, but because the words now had weight. Serafina stepped beside her. "How many?" she asked. 5. The Queen nodded slowly. "Then we must tell them." Alina knew what that meant. She had to tell the families herself. The first name was not Henrik. She went first to Jakob of Dorfheim. He had a wife and 2 children. The farm was small. The message was brief. His wife needed a moment to understand what fallen meant, though she knew it already. The second was Rudolf. His sister received the news. She asked no questions. When Alina finally took the road to the southern fields, the sun had already risen high. The grain stood quiet in the wind. It was a clear day. Henrik's mother was working at the edge of the field. She knelt with her hands in the soil. When she saw Alina coming, she slowly straightened. She said nothing. Alina stopped. The folded sheet was not visible in her hand. There was a skirmish, she began calmly. "Several men from Ardenthal have fallen." The mother nodded once. "Is he among them?" Alina looked at her. "Yes." The woman drew in a deep breath. "Was it quick?" she asked. Alina did not hesitate. "Yes." It was the only mercy she could give. The mother looked out over the field. "He did not want to be afraid," she said. "He was not alone," Alina answered. It was not a description. It was a fact. A long moment passed. Then the woman knelt again. She took earth into her hand and let it run through her fingers. "I will keep the hen," she said at last. "It lays well." Alina nodded. She remained there for another moment, but there was nothing more to say. No comfort could fill the emptiness, and no word could make the loss smaller. As she left, she felt for the first time that something final had happened in Ardenthal. At the castle, the next families were already waiting. 5 houses would be different that night. 5 places at tables would remain empty, and the waiting had been given a face. When Alina returned to the northern wing, the smell of blood and herbs had reached the corridors. The wounded lay on straw mattresses that had been hastily carried into the former guard rooms. Cloths had been soaked in water and laid fresh upon brows. A lady of the court knelt beside one man and held his hand while the healer loosened the bandage around his arm. The man with the trembling gaze was awake. He sat half upright, his shoulders against the wall. His name was Ewald. On the day of the summons, he had stood quietly, hands clasped tight. Now his fingers were raw from tension. When he recognized Alina, he tried to straighten. "Lie still," she said gently. He nodded. "We did not get far," he said after a while. His voice was dry. He was exhausted and no longer trembling. It was an advance. Alina sat on a low stool beside him. "We thought it was only a small unit," he continued. And there were more. He did not look directly at her. His gaze remained somewhere on the wall. They came from the woods, not from the front, from the side. He lifted his hand a little, as if trying to trace the movement, then let it fall again. We gathered. The king was at the front. "Did he?" Alina began. "He did not hesitate," Ewald said. "He did not fall back. It was not a tale of heroism. It was a statement." "Henrik?" she asked at last. Ewald closed his eyes for a moment. "He was beside me." The words came more slowly. "He struck one. Maybe 2. I no longer know exactly. A brief silence settled. Then he was hit. Where? Alina asked. Here. Ewald placed his hand upon his own chest, just below the shoulder. He fell, not dead at once, but he searched for the right word and found none. He was still breathing, he said finally. He told me to tell his mother he was not afraid. Alina felt her hands close without meaning them to. And was he? She asked quietly. Ewald looked at her directly now. We were all afraid. He said it without shame. But he did not run. That was all. No heroic final cry. No grand sacrifice. Only a young man who had stayed. And the others? Alina asked. Jakob was hit worse. Rudolf died at once. 2 more from the Allies fell. We could not bring them back. His voice grew quieter. It was no great battle, he repeated, as if he had to convince himself. Alina nodded. Are you in pain? Yes. He sounded almost surprised. But I am alive. She stayed a little longer, not because she had anything to say, but because leaving too quickly would have been too abrupt. Ardenthal knows, she said at last. Good. He closed his eyes. As she rose, she looked at the man with the bandaged arm. His face was pale, his lips dry. He murmured in fever, words without connection. In one of the rooms, someone was weeping quietly. That evening, Serafina had the bells struck in the courtyard. Not as for a gathering, only once. Long, deep. The people came. Not many, but enough. Alina stepped forward. She held the sheet in her hand. There was a skirmish, she said. 5 men from Ardenthal have fallen. She spoke the names. No murmur passed through the crowd. Everyone waited for the next words. Others are wounded. They are with us. A man in the crowd asked, was it necessary? Alina looked at him. It was war, she said. There was nothing more. As the people dispersed, she remained standing. The courtyard was no longer the same place it had been on the day of the summons. Back then, fear had been a possibility. Now it was experience. That night, no light burned in 5 houses. And in the writing room, the list still lay upon the table. Not as a document, as a beginning. After Alina left the courtyard, she did not return to Serafina at once. She went again through the rooms where the wounded lay, because she understood that the list was only part of the truth, and the bodies of the men carried the rest. In the rear room lay Conrad from the village by the river. His leg had been splintered, his trousers cut open to the thigh. He was conscious, but his gaze was unsteady, as if he saw something that was not here. When Alina approached, he spoke without prompting. He said they had believed it would be only a brief clash. They had been told the enemy unit was small and disordered, but the woods had swallowed sound, and by the time they reacted, the enemy was already among them. He described no heroic movements and no great words. He described confusion. Men had called to one another without seeing one another. The ground had been uneven. Those who fell did not always rise again. He spoke of the king as well. Arvid had been visible, and that had given many courage. But courage was not a shield. He had seen Rudolf struck before he had fully raised his sword. Jakob had continued running though he was already bleeding, and Henrik had not hesitated when another man stepped back. Conrad did not stop because he was weeping. He stopped because he had no strength left. The healer placed a damp cloth on his brow. Alina listened without interrupting him. She asked no questions that sounded like bravery. She asked only about the order of events, about the timing, about the distance. They were sober questions, but they showed that she was not seeking only comfort. She was seeking understanding. When she left the room, she knew that the officer's report had not misrepresented the truth, but it had shortened it, A skirmish was not an entry in a document. It was noise, fear, wrong judgments, and seconds deciding who returned. That evening, after the names had been spoken in the courtyard, no loud lamentation began. People left in small groups. Neighbors stopped in front of certain houses. Little was said, and when people spoke, they did so softly. In Henrik's house, light burned for a long time. No one went in, and no one came out. His mother worked in the stable even after dark, because work gave shape to a mind that would otherwise be too free. In the castle, Alina did not remain with Serafina in the hall. She returned to the writing room. The list still lay on the table. She picked it up again and read the names once more. Not to memorize them, but to assure herself that they truly stood there. Beside the fallen, the wounded were listed with brief notes on the kind and severity of their injuries. Alina sat down and began to write. They were not letters to the families of the dead. She had informed them in person. They were letters to the Allied command in the east. She wrote questions about supplies, about rotation of units, about securing the flanks. She did it in a factual tone, without accusation, but with clarity. She knew she did not command military decisions, but she understood now that Ardenthal was not allowed only to pay. Ardenthal also had to ask. When she put the quill aside, it had grown late. The courtyard lay dark. Only in the northern wing did light still burn. The next morning, the village was changed. Work began as usual, but it was more concentrated. In the southern field, Henrik's mother stood among the other women. No one spoke his name aloud, yet his place in the assignment was not given to another. They left a gap, not out of ritual, but from a habit not yet broken. Ewald asked that morning to be allowed to sit in the courtyard. They carried him outside so he could breathe. Several men from the town came to him. They did not ask for heroics. They asked about distance, about the strength of the enemy, about the number of their own units. They wanted to understand how large the war was that now touched them. Ewald answered as well as he could. He said the East was farther than one thought. He said alliances did not mean knowing the same ground. He said fear was normal, and no one had stood alone. Alina watched from the edge of the courtyard. She recognized that with every conversation, the war became a little less abstract. It was no longer only paper and seals. It was a man with a bandaged shoulder, speaking slowly. That evening, she returned once more to the southern field. Not to speak again, but to see. The grain moved in the wind, and the women worked in silence. Henrik's mother straightened when Alina approached. "I did not slaughter the black hen," she said. Alina was silent. "It still lays eggs," the mother said. "That is good." Alina nodded. She knew that this was the shape in which that family carried loss, not through words, through continuation. On the way back to the castle, she did not think of heroism. She did not think of revenge. She thought of structure. 5 names had been enough to change the village. If there were more, Ardenthal would have to be prepared. In the west tower, she stopped by the window. The valley was green. The river moved quietly. But now she knew that quiet was not a promise. She had seen the list, heard the wounded speak, and carried the gaze of a mother. From that day on, the war was no longer something that began and ended in letters. It had arrived in Ardenthal,